TikToker Michaela Witter, aged 28, posted a clip on the platform in early August of 2023 of her encounter with a serial prowler at a Barnes & Noble in Burbank, California. Witter began recording on her phone after she'd noticed that a man later identified as 36-year-old Kales Crowder was following her through the store. The woman captured the moment that Crowder crouched behind her and appeared to be sniffing her backside. Witter recorded him doing the same thing behind another woman in the store. When Crowder returned, got down and approached Witter again, she turned around and confronted him, asking what he was doing. The man replied that he was tying his shoe. Witter reported him to the front desk and left. In her TikTok, she described the incident as one of her creepiest experiences ever. When the video went viral, multiple women came forward reporting that Crowder had done the same thing to them. The Burbank Police Department launched an investigation, but the man wasn't arrested for the sniffing incident. However, later in August, he was taken into custody for peeping on a Glendale family's home while their children were home. He pleaded no contest to the prowling charge and was sentenced to 60 days in county jail. He was released within days of serving his sentence, with the condition that he registered as an offender, which he failed to do, prompting him to be rearrested less than a week later. He was released once again due to a legal technicality that involved providing notice regarding specific registration requirements. His latest arrest marked the 44th time he'd been taken into custody in Los Angeles County since 2005. In spite of his long history of peeping, prowling, and residential burglaries and his most recent crimes, Crawford remained, as of the latest updates, a free man. Number 9. Incident in South Nashville. In January of 2019, Facebook user McKenzie Stevens posted about a harrowing incident that took place on her property in South Nashville, Tennessee. The woman's surveillance cameras captured a ski mask-wearing Peeping Tom as he walked up to her bedroom window. Stevens later told WKRN, "I think he was maybe looking at what I had, or maybe looking at me." The woman reported that he remained outside her home for 15 minutes before her dog, Atticus, scared him away. She would credit the alert pet with possibly saving her life and described the incident as the scariest thing she'd ever experienced. In the aftermath, she repositioned the cameras and added motion sensor lights to her yard. Stevens also filed a police report, but no arrests were made in the immediate aftermath. Number 8. Tyrie Parker. Leading up to August of 2021, serial prowler Tyrie Parker was suspected of having carried out multiple auto thefts in the Riverside neighborhood of Jacksonville, Florida. In July, the 22-year-old had made off with a pistol from an unlocked vehicle. Then, in the early morning hours of August 3rd, he was caught in the act by 26-year-old Caroline Scholart as he was trying to break into her vehicle outside her Riverside home. Scholart was an active member of the U.S. Coast Guard, having served for over 8 years, and had reportedly been accustomed through her training in dealing with high-pressure situations. She drew a pistol and held Parker at gunpoint as she called 911. Parker brandished the weapon he'd previously stolen and a standoff ensued. Gunfire erupted during the 911 call as Parker shot Scholart multiple times. Home and neighborhood security video showed the shooting and the suspect before and after he ran down the sidewalk and got into a waiting vehicle. Scholart died later that morning, and Parker surrendered to local law enforcement about a week after the shooting. During the legal proceedings that followed, a clinical psychologist testified that Parker had an IQ of 66, which qualified him as intellectually disabled. On the 5th of July 2022, the man pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed burglary. After sentencing Parker to life in prison, Judge Meredith Charbula told him, "Listening to this young lady die was one of the most chilling things I've ever heard, and I'm old, and I've heard a lot." Court video showed that Parker had virtually no reaction to the verdict. Number 7. Kenton Driscoll. In the spring of 2022, Law enforcement in Farmington Hills, Michigan, arrested Kenton Driscoll, a man in his late 50s, following multiple incidents in which he'd lurked in people's backyards and peered through their windows. Resident Dennis Furman's home was one of Driscoll's targets. Furman described the incident as extremely creepy, given that he was at home with his wife and 3 children when Driscoll walked onto their back deck at around 12 o'clock at night. A manhunt was launched, and video from a police drone captured the moment that Driscoll was taken into custody while he was camping in the woods near I-696 and Orchard Lake Road. The arrest marked one of several times that the man had already been taken into custody for prowling incidents perpetrated against Oakland County communities. Then in October of 2022, Driscoll was once again arrested by law enforcement in Warren after he'd been seen by residents peeping through their windows late at night. He'd also been captured on multiple security cameras. Warren police set up an investigation in the area of 11 Mile and Ryan on October the 11th and eventually spotted Driscoll. He was arrested while trying to flee on a bicycle. He was caught with a sack full of burglary tools, which included a handsaw, box cutter, pry bar, and screwdriver. Driscoll described them as typical handyman tools and claimed his arrest was illegal. At the time, he'd amassed 9 prior convictions for disorderly conduct and being a peeping Tom. As per updates from late January of 2023, a court psychiatrist determined that Driscoll was not competent to understand the charges leveled against him. As per a judge's ruling, he had to be treated to competency within 15 months of the charges to face them in criminal court or else be released. Number 6. Kazzy Noel Encarnacion. On August the 29th of 2023, Roland Alexander was found dead at his home just west of the Whittier city limits in the unincorporated South Whittier area in Los Angeles County. 84-year-old Alexander had been brutally stabbed to death by an intruder who'd entered his home through an unlocked door. After killing him, the intruder stole his car, a Toyota RAV4, and drove it for a day before abandoning it in Chino. The authorities subsequently released surveillance photos of the wanted man, a suspected prowler, as he was running near the victim's home. He was identified as the same suspect who'd assaulted another elderly man in the area shortly before stabbing Alexander. That attack, however, was broken up by the victim's son. On September the 3rd of 2023, deputies from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Special Enforcement Bureau served a warrant at a home in La Habra. 25-year-old Kazzy Noel Encarnacion was arrested and charged with 1 count of murder, 2 counts of burglary, and 1 count of attempted mayhem. As of the latest information available to the media, Encarnacion had pleaded not guilty to all of his charges. Number 5. Charles Marcel Newman. In November of 2023, serial prowler Charles Marcel Newman was arrested for trying to break into the same home in Santa Monica, California, over the course of several months. A homeowner in the 200 block of 24th Street had reported Newman to local police in September and October after he was captured on their surveillance cameras trying doors, windows, and car door handles on the premises. By the time that officers from the Santa Monica Police Department arrived at the scene in November, 46-year-old Newman had already been detained in the driveway by private security officers working for the homeowner. Newman was reported as homeless, was expected to be charged with multiple attempted burglaries, and since he was also a registered offender with violations of his registration conditions, the man, who appeared to have fresh bruises on his face in his most recent mugshot, had a long history of prowling incidents in Santa Monica for which he'd been convicted in the past. From January the 14th through the 21st of 2019, he carried out at least 5 early morning burglary attempts, some of which were caught on surveillance cameras. He'd previously done time for prowling-related crimes in 2012. Number 4. Alan Jacobson. In late September of 2023, law enforcement in Toronto, Canada, was called to Queen Street East and Woodbine Avenue following reports that a man had followed a girl home from a bus stop. No arrests were made at the time, but 2 days later, on September the 26th, the same suspect appeared in the backyard of a home in the area of Queen Street East and Victoria Park Avenue. 57-year-old Alan Jacobson was arrested on the property's front porch. According to an official release from September the 28th, the authorities were concerned that there could be more victims. Jacobson faced charges of harassment by following, prowling by night, and failing to comply with release order. Number 3. Tyler Giuliano. Connecticut teacher Jeffrey Giuliano from New Fairfield received a call from his sister on September the 27th of 2012, in which she told him that someone was outside her home. Jeffrey lived next door to his sister, so he grabbed his legally owned gun and went to investigate what he believed to be a prowling incident. He came upon a ski mask-wearing intruder who moved towards him in a threatening manner with a shiny object in hand. Jeffrey shot the intruder 3 times. Law enforcement found the suspect dead in the driveway with a knife in his hand. Hours later, Jeffrey learned that he'd shot his own son, teenager Tyler. What the latter, a well-liked student at New Fairfield High School, had been doing prowling around his aunt's home remained unknown. Reports from those who knew him suggested that robbery wasn't within his character, which urged some to theorize that he'd been carrying out a prank. Jeffrey and his wife had taken in Tyler and his sister roughly 4 years prior. Their biological father had received a prison sentence, and they would have otherwise gone to an orphanage. The Giulianos, who had 3 other children, adopted them. Jeffrey was reported as inconsolable upon learning that he'd inadvertently gunned down his son. He and his wife fully cooperated with law enforcement in the tragedy's wake. One town official described the incident as something out of a Hollywood script. The shooting was ultimately deemed justified, and no charges were brought against the grieving father. Today's topic was requested by Cali Girl Living in Nevada 8. If you have any other topics you'd like to learn about, subscribe and let us know in the comments section below. Number 2. Gimp Man. In 2019, English woman Abby Conroy and her wife, Pip, moved to the village of Claverham, Somerset, in search of a quiet life. Once they got settled in the quaint village, Abby would go for walks, often at night, as the exercise reportedly helped her deal with her anxiety. On one such night in the summer of 2019, she encountered a prowler known as Gimp Man. To local residents, he was wearing a full black rubbery outfit with X-marked red eyes and stitching around the mouth. The man was reported to have been grunting and breathing heavily. Before charging at 23-year-old Abby, bystanders intervened and they snapped a photo of the prowler before they and Abby were able to chase him off. He disappeared into a hedge. Speaking to the media in the aftermath, the severely distraught woman reported that she was initially unsure if she was dreaming or not. She told the Daily Mail, "If I could speak to him now, I'd want to know why he does what he does. Everything is running through my head. I'd want him to know just how scary it was." Pip added that the incident had left them feeling paranoid and that they'd fitted their home with a security light. Gimp Man had been a problem in Somerset and its surrounding areas for years. He was known for jumping out on residents, appearing at their windows at night, behaving inappropriately towards animals, and performing suggestive acts. Since November of 2018, local police had received over a dozen reports related to the prowler. Following the incident with Abby and a photo that emerged from it, Gimp Man attracted international attention, and the New York Post reported the story with the headline, "Freak dressed in black gimp suit terrorizes UK village." Several more sightings were reported leading up to May of 2023, when on 2 separate occasions, a man in a black suit and mask terrified female motorists driving home at night. The victim spotted him crawling and writhing on the ground. Local farmer Joshua Hunt, aged 32, was arrested minutes after the second incident on May the 9th. He'd previously been taken in custody on suspicion of causing a public nuisance over a series of similar incidents in the Cleve, Claverham, and Yatton areas in 2022, but was released due to insufficient evidence. A search of his home, carried out after his 2023 arrest, produced a journal in which Hunt had written a story about someone called Jack, who purchased a black rubber suit and a mask with white paint on it. He described the latter in writing as a face that would scare the life out of anyone. He'd also made Google searches about the Somerset Gimp. Hunt admitted in court that he struggled with his mental health and took responsibility for the May incidents. He was found guilty of causing intentional harassment, alarm, or distress and banned from wearing the suit for 5 years. Aside from the time he'd spent awaiting his punishment, Hunt avoided a custodial sentence. While the authorities claimed that the Gimp Man had finally been apprehended, many remained skeptical and feared he was on the loose, ready to strike again. Hunt himself denied being the notorious prowler, adding, "The outfit I wear is not anything to do with the Gimp." We'll line up when inviting strangers into your home goes wrong right after number 1. Stay tuned if you'd like to watch that episode as well still. Number 1. Joseph Zyer. In May of 1990, Joan Cornell returned to her condominium in Cape Coral, Florida, to find that her daughter Robin and her babysitter, 32-year-old Lisa Story, had been brutally murdered. In the investigation that followed, it emerged that a prowler had broken into the home while the victims were sleeping. He abused them both before beating and strangling them to death. The case went cold for nearly 3 decades until Joseph Zyer, a man in his early 50s, was arrested for an unrelated assault. In 2016, he provided a DNA sample that proved to be a match to material collected from the 1990 crime scene. Zyer was arrested for the double murder, but he pleaded not guilty. On the eve of his trial, he wore an ill-fitting veneer over his teeth on which he'd written the word "killer" in permanent marker. The writing was visible when the deranged defendant opened his mouth. During his trial, Zyer claimed that he'd had intercourse with Cornell a few months prior to the slayings, which was why his DNA was present at the scene. When prosecutors pointed out that the sample wouldn't have been detected after such a long time, Zyer called Cornell, who was in attendance, a pig who never washed her sheets. That woman was adamant that she'd never met him prior to him being identified as her daughter's killer during his incarceration. Zyer had sent Cornell 3 separate letters threatening retaliation if she didn't impede the investigation into the killings. While he was on the witness stand, Zyer made vulgar gestures and yelled at the jury in a display which his lawyer, Lee Hollander, reported felt like sitting down watching a train wreck. Zyer was ultimately convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder after only a few hours of deliberations. In May of 2023, 10 out of 12 jurors recommended that he'd be given the death penalty. Before the sentence was officially handed down, Zyer, who was shackled, called over his other attorney, Kevin Shirley. The latter leaned over, assuming Zyer wanted to whisper something to him. In the moments that followed, as captured on courtroom video, the convicted killer elbowed Shirley in the side of the head. He was immediately tackled to the ground by bailiffs and removed from the courtroom. Zyr's behavior throughout the proceedings arguably reflected what Cornell had previously said about him, that he is evil. There are no feelings there. He's just blank. In early December of 2022, a Los Angeles attorney shared the story of how he was robbed by 2 women whom he'd invited at his home in the Hollywood Hills. The unnamed man told a local media outlet that he'd met the women, only identified as Holly and Britany, while bar hopping in Beverly Hills on July the 25th of 2022. He reported that he, along with his friends and the women, decided to bring the party back to his home. After his friends had left at around 3 a.m., the lawyer went into his bedroom with Holly and Britany, but remembered that things weren't adding up as the women were randomly texting before they started giving him vodka shots. He became unconscious and woke up roughly 15 hours later to find his home ransacked. The lawyer believed that the drinks Holly and Britany had given him were laced with drugs, as he'd reportedly never before passed out from alcohol. The women made off with cash and 3 Rolex watches, which the victim estimated were worth close to $18,000. Still, the man stated that they could have done a lot worse and felt fortunate to have emerged from the incident with just his possessions stolen. Surveillance photos of the suspects were released by the authorities, but as of the latest updates, they hadn't been arrested. Number 6. Summer DeJardan and Daniel Wago. In April of 2020, an unnamed Michigan man talked to 24-year-old Summer DeJardan on Facebook and invited her to his home. Macomb Daily would later report that they discussed the meetup as an intercourse for drugs type of arrangement. However, DeJardan had actually been planning to rob the victim with her boyfriend, 21-year-old Daniel Wargo. When DeJardan arrived at the address, Wargo forced his way inside with a handgun, announcing the robbery. The victim refused to comply with his demands, and a confrontation ensued, during the course of which Wargo shot him in the torso. He and his girlfriend then fled the scene in a Chevrolet Cavalier, but were tracked down through their social media profiles and arrested later that same day. The victim was taken to a Detroit hospital and pronounced to be in stable condition. In 2021, Wargo was given a sentence of 15 to 30 years in prison after pleading guilty to armed robbery, attempted murder, possession of a weapon by a felon, and possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. That same year, DeJardan pleaded no contest to conspiracy to commit armed robbery in exchange for the dismissal of other charges. In September, the mother of two, who admitted that she had methamphetamine addiction, was sentenced to 6 to 28 years in prison. Number 5. Luke Lembrick. In the summer of 2019, Australian man Luke Lembrick, aged 29, matched with Lisa Ann Price, then in her early 30s, on Tinder, and they started texting each other. In December, Price sent him a photo of herself and another woman, claiming that she wanted to bring her to his residence. The duo arrived at the Condell Park home in Western Sydney, which Lembrick shared with his mother, Robin, who was terminally ill from bone cancer. The trio went to Lembrick's bedroom, where they partook in alcohol and cocaine. At some point during the rendezvous, he showed the women a stack of bills amounting to around $15,000, as well as a blazer that had cash overflowing from its pockets. The display of wealth reportedly gave Price the idea to do him over, and in the early hours of December the 7th, 3 men raided Lembrick's home. They were subsequently identified as Joseph Nem, Bilal Rahim, and Viliami Tuafahima. A confrontation ensued, during the course of which Lembrick was stabbed multiple times with a knife that had reportedly been taken from his home. Robin was reported to have witnessed the attack that had floored Lembrick, who then told her, "I'm going to die, Mum. I'm going to die." The emergency services were called to the home at around 2:45 a.m. Paramedics found Lembrick in critical condition and were unable to save him, as he succumbed to a stab wound that had pierced his heart. The 5 people connected to his death were arrested in the aftermath. Nem, Bilal, and Tuafahima were charged with murder, as well as aggravated break-in and entering with intent to commit a serious indictable offense in company, among other charges. Price was brought before the court as an accessory before the fact to murder, in addition to being charged with aggravated break-in and entering. Shireen Rizk, aged 46, the woman who was reported to have accompanied her to the residence, was charged with being an accessory before the fact to murder. All 5 defendants were ordered to stand trial in February of 2023. Number 4. Incident in Fort Lauderdale. While out at the rooftop at One Willow Bar in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, a man shared drinks with 2 women until the early hours of December the 4th of 2022. They exchanged numbers, and about an hour later, he met them again outside of Rock Bar and drove them to his Lauderdale by the Sea home for cocktails. The man would later report that he had never lost sight of his drink while they were at his house. It's believed that they had relations, after which the man fell asleep. Upon waking up, he realized that his Platinum Amex credit card had been taken from his back pocket, while his $25,000 Submariner Blueface Rolex watch had been removed from his wrist. He texted the women regarding the whereabouts of his valuables but received no answer back, so he reported them to the Broward County Sheriff's Office. The authorities launched an investigation and released clear surveillance footage of the suspects that had been captured at the rooftop bar. They were described as being in their mid-20s with long dark hair, and one of them was reported as having a scorpion tattoo on her left thigh. Number 3. Aolon Wallace. Arkansas woman Aolon Wallace met a man on social media on June the 13th of 2022 and invited him to her home in Pine Bluff. The situation turned violent not long after his arrival, as the man tried to rob her. The unnamed assailant tasered Wallace in the neck before he started choking her, prompting her to brandish the gun she kept for protection. The man took the weapon off her, then started hitting her in the head with it until she gave him her wallet. The vicious attack left her with a broken nose, deep gashes on her forehead, and a severely swollen face. The damage Wallace had sustained was visible in an interview that the woman gave in the assault's aftermath. While speaking to the media, Wallace blamed herself for her ordeal and for letting a stranger into her home, urging other women, be careful who you talk to, do your research. She also stated an intention of leaving Arkansas for her home state of California. Number 2. Joseph Trevor. In the early hours of April the 20th of 2019, English teenagers Megan Newton and Joseph Trevor met at a taxi rank in Newcastle-under-Lyme. Earlier in the night, 18-year-old Newton had gone to the Kiln nightclub after finishing her shift at a chip shop. Trevor had been taken into custody by the police, who confiscated a bag of ketamine found in his possession. He was released and told he'd have to return at a later date. Suspicions about his rapid release would later be focused on the connection of his parents, who worked for Staffordshire Police. But they were eventually cleared of any wrongdoing. Suspicions of interference persisted nonetheless and were enhanced by the fact that a few years prior, Trevor had been accused of abusing a teenager in a case that ended up not being prosecuted. Upon his chance meeting with Newton on April the 20th, Trevor claimed that he didn't want to go home to his parents in his state at the time, as he was severely intoxicated from drugs and alcohol. He was a semi-professional soccer player, and Newton was a junior soccer coach with aspirations of becoming a sports therapist. They went to the same school but were largely strangers to each other. In what would be deemed as an act of kindness, Newton invited Trevor to her apartment to sleep off his intoxication. CCTV cameras would capture them walking into her Stoke-on-Trent home shortly before 4 a.m. At some point in the hours that followed, Trevor repeatedly forced himself on Newton. After abusing the teenager, he strangled her and stabbed her in the back 9 times. He abandoned her on the bed, naked and splayed as she bled to death. He was then captured by CCTV, exiting Newton's home, using her key, which he then discarded. Trevor's composure upon leaving the gruesome murder scene would be described as remarkably composed. He was arrested later that day after Newton's mutilated body was discovered. Trevor subsequently pleaded guilty to murder and another 2 counts stemming from the abuse, for which he was sentenced to a minimum term of 21 years and 65 days in prison on February the 17th of 2020. Number 1. James Squires. On February the 21st of 2019, an Englishwoman saw James Squires outside a shop in Evington, Leicester. She'd seen him begging on the street in the past and assumed he was homeless. It was a cold winter day, so the unnamed 45-year-old woman invited Squires to her home to warm up, offering him food, tea, and cider. They talked for a few hours, after which the woman asked Squires to leave so that she could go to bed. It was at that point that Squires, who'd posed as a rough sleeper but in fact had a home, ruthlessly attacked her. He punched the victim twice, rendering her unconscious. Squires then persisted to strike and stomp her with such force that he broke her jaw and ruptured her right eye, which later had to be surgically removed. The victim regained her senses to find that she was covered in blood and bruises. Squires, who it was later determined was a heroin addict, was arrested. The only explanation he subsequently provided was that he'd fallen asleep in the victim's home and woke up to her punching him because she wanted him out. He claimed that he exploded and attacked her continuously for 10 to 15 minutes. A judge, however, suspected that drugs and alcohol had affected his memory, eventually pleaded guilty to causing grievous bodily harm with intent, and was given a sentence of 7.5 years in prison. During an impact statement, his victim, who'd been fitted with a prosthetic eyeball, reported that she suffered from panic attacks and had become distrustful of people. Thanks for watching. Would you rather be wrongly accused of stalking an ex and have your name tainted across social media, or spend a week in prison with a cannibal as your cellmate? Let us know in the comments section below.